Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the iPad mini 5 and see how this iPad holds up in 2021. Now this is, I think, the last iPad mini that I get to talk about this year because we haven't gotten an iPad mini 6 yet, and I think the iPad mini 5 was a worthwhile upgrade for sure for the whole entire iPad mini lineup 100%. Now I will leave one of these linked down below. If you want to get them from there, you can help support the channel at the same time. Now looking on the front of the iPad mini 5, you can see that we still have that pretty much the same 7.9-inch display, which as I mentioned before is not a bad panel, you know? I think in this day and age it's a little bit dated for sure, but I don't really think it's that big of a deal, and I really do think that if you're going to get this iPad, you're really not going to be complaining about the display that much. There may be some other things. I kind of wish it had a little bit less bezel, but as the rumors are looking like, it's looking like the iPad mini 6 is going to be having a bigger display or less bezel on it, one or the other. The home button on the front as well as the front facing camera, and I just think it's kind of funny that the design never really changed from the first iPad mini to this iPad mini. You have the lightning port and headphone jack on this device as well, and on the back you have the aluminum back, which still feels really great as I mentioned before, and that single camera setup. Now when you're feeling this iPad in the hand, you're picking it up and you're using it day by day, you are going to be still feeling like you have a solid iPad for sure. This thing doesn't feel like a cheap iPad, it doesn't feel weak, it still feels extremely premium. The main difference that I can see from my iPad mini 5 and maybe something like an iPad Pro 4th generation is obviously the flat sides, but obviously the lack of bezel on the iPad Pro 4th generation that the iPad mini 5 has, but I really don't think it's that big of a deal. Everything about this iPad still seems to me that it's a pretty decent iPad for sure, and it's very, very well rounded. Now it does support Apple Pencil 1, no Apple Pencil 2 support, so keep that in mind. If you're somebody who likes having that Apple Pencil 2 support, you will have to go and get something like the iPad Air 4 or the iPad Pro 3rd gen or 4th gen. This iPad mini does not support it, but it does support Apple Pencil 1, which I still think is pretty good for a lot of people. So I think in the outside department, that pretty much covers up this iPad. I think it's a very respectable iPad. I think people know what they're getting for when they get this iPad, and the only benefit I can think of this design, or the fact that Apple not changing it, I think people at this point know what to expect. They know what they're getting into when they buy an iPad like this. So I think in terms of that pretty much covers up the outside. Now hitting on the cameras, this little department isn't really that crazy of a deal because most people aren't really going to be using this iPad as like a full-fledged camera, but we do have that 8 megapixel standard lens on the back, and we have a 7 megapixel standard lens on the front too. I don't know if there's a difference between standard and wide angle lenses, but I guess we have that here. Now this is what I will tell you in this specific case. With that 8 megapixel sensor on the back, it's a very, very standard lens. I think hence the name they put it. It only does 1080p at 30, and I think that's probably one of the bigger disappointments on this iPad. This iPad came out in 2019. We've been getting 4K at 60 on the back and probably 4K at 60 on the front for some devices at that point, and I think this device could have easily supported it, and the fact that it only shoots 1080p videos is kind of strange. But I do think for people who just want to go ahead and use this iPad as just a media device or a student device or whatever, I think you're probably going to be okay. But I really do think the bigger problems are going to arise when you're wanting to go ahead and maybe film some videos on this thing. If you want to become film some YouTube videos on this thing, you're definitely going to be getting a different type of experience on this because of the camera not being the high quality. So keep that in mind. I think everything else about this iPad is perfectly fine, but that is something to keep in mind for that back camera. But I do think the front camera with that 7 megapixel lens still shooting 1080p at 30 is actually pretty okay. I really don't think that's that big of an issue, and for the most part, most people are still only filming 1080p on the front cameras. And I'll tell you this iPad mini has a better front camera. My M1 MacBook that I literally just spent like $1,700 on, so I think it's totally okay, and I think the front camera is way better than the back camera. But I do think if you need something that has the best camera out there, you probably will be better off using your iPhone or Android or whatever. So in terms of camera, that pretty much covers it up. Now I think one of the best things about the iPad mini 5, two things, probably one more so than the other, and probably one of the main reasons why I would recommend picking up this device in 2021 is the software and a little bit of the battery size and the battery life. So first of all, the software. This device's software is going to be lasting for such a long time. I don't even know what happened to my voice. Because this thing has the same chipset as the iPhone XS, that can pretty much just speak mountains of how long this device is going to last. this device is pretty much going to last as long as you want it to. In my head, I think it's going to last just as long, probably if not longer, than the iPhone XS and XR. And those phones just came out not that long ago. So you are definitely going to be getting a long software supported phone from this type of device. And as I mentioned before, that is always something you want to keep an eye out for. And this device's software is going to not only be smooth, it's going to be stock, very little bloatware, but you're pretty much guaranteed software support for many, many years. And as I mentioned before, that is a huge asset for this device, 100% for sure. Now, the battery size and the battery life is still actually pretty good. You're getting over a 5,000 milliamp hour battery on this device, which I think is great. Obviously, there's no wireless charging or anything on an iPad, but I really do think, in my opinion, that the battery size is kind of hit or miss. I think it's actually pretty decent, but the fact of the matter is that there have been more iPads that have had way bigger batteries than this thing, and I think it is kind of like a strange thing that Apple did. I wish these things had bigger batteries, but for the size that they are, it's totally understandable, and it's still a massive size battery for sure. So I think that pretty much covers up two things that are kind of good on this, iPad. The software is great, the battery size and life may be a little bit different, so keep that in mind, but that pretty much covers up that aspect. Now, ending it off with the performance, as I mentioned before, this device has that Apple A12 Bionic chip inside of it with 3GB of RAM. So this device is pretty much like an iPhone XR in terms of performance. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's actually, the 4GB or 3GB of RAM is still a really good amount of RAM on a device. And because this thing is approaching 3 years old, or it's already 3 years old at this point, I think for the most part, you're going to have a solid experience from it. I don't think you're going to be complaining about it too much. Of course, it's not the fastest, smoothest performing thing of all time, or it's 2 years old, my bad. My math is so bad. You're getting a solid performing device from this thing. Now, I'll give you some examples. First of all, if you're a light user, if you just want to use this thing basically for light type of apps and things like that, then yeah, you're probably going to be getting, a very extremely good experience from it because it's solid. Now, continuing on with that, if you're a student and you want to take your iPads out to, your classes or whatever the case is, and you want to do some light video editing and playing some games here and there, then this tablet is also going to kill it in that sense too. It's going to be a really solid iPad. But even if you want to take it up a notch, even beyond that, and let's say you want to do some heavier intensive stuff, you want to play some heavy video games, you want to do some, big video editing stuff, then I think this iPad is going to be perfectly fine there too. But do keep in mind that the RAM is going to be one of those issues that you're probably going to see a bigger issue at, in my opinion. I feel like with the lack of 6 gigs of RAM or 4 gigs of RAM on the top tier iPad, you may be running into more issues, but I really don't think it's that big of a deal. And to be honest, the amount of RAM, the amount of performance that this chipset has inside of it is still extremely relevant for sure. So that pretty much covers up the performance. I think the iPad mini 5 is still an extremely fast iPad for sure. Now, to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, is the iPad mini 5 still worth it in 2021? Well, this is what I'll tell you. I think the iPad mini 5 is still completely worth it in 2021. I think it has a lot going for it. I think it's still a very good iPad. There's really not that much to complain about. There may be a couple of things here and there, but I think for the most part, no matter what you do with it, you're going to be solid. If you're trying to expect, to get top tier, iPad Pro type of experience, you may have another thing coming. It may be better if you get like an iPad Pro 3rd generation or something. I would highly recommend that iPad if you want to get it. A brand new one, a used iPad Pro 3rd gen is going to be better and are probably around the same price, maybe a little bit more expensive than a new iPad mini 5. But I really do think with the iPad mini 5, you're getting a solid iPad all around. There are some areas that I'm not really a huge fan of, as I mentioned before. Things like the back camera, the battery size is definitely good, but it's not amazing. And maybe the bezel on the front, some people may not like that. All those things are pretty much okay with me, but for a lot of people out there may be, one issue that you may have. Also, no Apple Pencil 2 support. Apple Pencil 2 is amazing. I love it. Unfortunately, this thing doesn't have it, but again, it has Apple Pencil 1 support. So that really pretty much covers up everything I wanted to hit on this device. If you guys have any other questions, or if you want to pick one of these things up, like I mentioned before, links will be down in the description. You can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. Hit the like button if you guys enjoy the video, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it'd be so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.